Now that you've found what you were looking for, your OER, what do you do with it? How do you teach with it? So let me invite our panelists up to the front here. George, Christopher, Amy, and Fernando. So I prepared a couple of questions to get things going, and I asked the panelists to kind of think about their own experiences of teaching with OERs. Now, they're a little bit different in that they've really all spent a lot of time developing OERs, right? But I want this to be the focus. We'll talk more about developing tomorrow, but right now the focus should be on teaching. So to get things going, the big question is, what are the effects of OER on your teaching, and how has it affected your classroom? Who wants to start?
George wants to. Well, a few years back, I started using OERs as the actual textbook for my class. Before that, was using some publisher-sponsored materials, and I have to admit that there were a couple of years before that I had started kind of dipping my foot in the bathtub of using OERs, just kind of using them as supplemental materials with my publisher-sponsored things. So I had a little bit of a training time to get myself used to how they work and what one should do with them. And I think now that I use them exclusively, I've on myself, the effect on myself has been that it's been a great source of professional development for me. It's opened me up into doing research online to find things that I never thought were there. So, and I think the effect on my students has been that I find that it produces better speakers. Well, French in my case. The publisher-sponsored materials that I was using were very traditional and kind of grammar, drill, and kill. Not a lot of conversation going on, you know. And now that I'm using these OERs, I think my face-to-face time with them is more precious, and so we spend more time using the language than talking about it.
So you've adopted kind of a flipped classroom model. You use more your OERs for them. How exactly are you using it?
Well, our class is supposed to be, normally if it were a completely face-to-face class, it would be 5 contact hours a week. And in my case, we have 3 face-to-face hours a week, and they do the other 2 online, carrying out various technology tasks. And that could be doing grammar exercises, making recordings, doing exercises in other third-party software programs. But in class, we're working our way through the activities and speaking French.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Pass it on. Amy.
OER have allowed me to integrate content and language learning in a way that using commercial materials was just not available to do. So you're able to use authentic materials and then structure them in a way that they're accessible to language learners and promote language learning. And I think this was beneficial for my teaching and certainly for the students who are now able to connect the language use with the real world and current events, things that are happening, so that it becomes more relevant and it's much more transparent why they're in the classroom, not just because, you know, the college said they needed to be in there.
Yeah, I guess I mean I have to give you guys a shout out, because I think that's one of the things that makes Accesso so terrific, is that you're using absolutely current, up-to-date materials and you're drawing from all kinds of media sites. So that's a great example of up-to-the-minute, authentic materials embedded in pedagogical materials. Okay.
My experience is more with the little OER side of things. We in the course that Carl mentioned at the beginning of the session, it's an introduction to Spanish. It's a beginning Spanish course. We use about half publisher-created materials and half our own materials that we developed. And we developed materials both from a community of designers, of teachers who teach that class, that have developed materials that we use for the class, and also developed by the students themselves, who are the users and the producers at the same time. And that has changed completely how both teachers and students look at their role in the course. Students are not simply passive consumers now. That changes their whole attitude towards the course. So in the past, when they were doing something for you, the teacher, because you're going to see it and evaluate it and give it a grade, now it's completely different. They know that they're doing something that other students are going to be looking at and commenting on and modifying and learning from. So the audience changes completely, and the way they look at their language learning process is completely different.
And that makes me think of what I was talking about, or we mentioned Orlando Kelm and his use of different sites in the idea of openness, that continuum, open classrooms. So you've opened it up. You have students who are looking at other people's productions. There are other students' productions. But you can open it up further and then have public viewing areas, so you can invite native speakers in your case in teaching Spanish, to actually comment on the materials, if you're comfortable with that, if your students want to do that. And he's done that quite successfully in Portuguese. So they will find a video clip, comment, or write an essay about it, and then actual people from Brazil end up in a conversation. So, well, yeah, that's true, but not exactly. And so he's opened up the classroom even more, I would say.
I have a question about how he's able to do that with FERPA, because we have these ideas. I mean, we would love to do that, but we're really not permitted to, because it is student work once they're producing. And then
the question is about FERPA. So doesn't that raise issues? Amy says at Kansas that they're not permitted to do that. Orlando, where are you? He's not here today. Yeah, maybe. But you're right. That's a gray area. And I was just attending yesterday afternoon. UT is looking at, we have Blackboard, and they're looking at other LMSs, and one of them is Canvas. And it's very easy for you to kind of have parts of your course that are public. So it may be that student production doesn't have to be for a grade. It just might be for a blog, and the blog is really to get interaction with native speakers. So I'm not quite sure how Orlando is finessing that, but yeah. Chris.
Okay. I should clarify. I'm here under an OER, under OER auspices, but the course material that I'm primarily responsible for was the creation began in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit of kind of retrofitting OER on top of a process of work that's been going on for almost 15 years. And in terms of the way the design, in other words, ours is now an open textbook. It is a complete course. It is self-contained, including testing and all those other sorts of things. And it was designed that way, and it was a radical redesign of its delivery at the same time. So we now have a single 80-minute meeting weekly, plus an individual face-to-face meeting, and that can be via Skype, alternating with a student assistant and with the instructor, and then lots of online activities, chats and B-board postings and so forth. So it really totally changed the way that I was teaching French, and we still maintain a conventional classroom track, but there are classes like this in Chinese, French, and Spanish, and we're doing some work in Arabic at the moment. Anyway, so what did it allow this sort of design? The interactive materials, and as I was saying at lunch, say a semester of French Online, which is the course that I co-authored, has 1,000 pages of content, 10,000 media files. It's a massive exposure to interaction, to native speakers, in other words, myriad voices, various ethnic origins within the French diaspora and so forth, it's completely impossible in a conventional textbook environment. And there is a weekly test prior to the class, which we can access and look at profiles across skills and so forth. So to prepare the instructor to give a very focused 80-minute class oriented almost entirely toward communication, which is sort of a common theme here when there's a heavy use of OER materials outside, of course, of the class. I'll talk at another time about what the development process and so forth is about. But
I have a comment from the virtual community or virtual audience, and they say, please be specific when you're talking about your methodologies, to be as specific as possible. Okay, so I want to ask then, and I want to say, Chris mentioned the idea of retrofitting older materials. That's where we are in foreign languages. A lot of the OERs, there's a question of whether we should even try to retrofit. It's a lot of work, or should we just try to create materials that are now kind of native using these new authoring tools. That's kind of a discussion maybe for tomorrow when we talk about designing and collaborating and where we should be going. But that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted you here, Chris, is to talk about that. So he's been at it for a long, long time, a lot longer than most people, and you can see where things have changed. Okay, so the question now is, can you tell me succinctly, what do you think the pros and the cons have been for you? You kind of did that already to a certain extent, but for you, and I'm not asking people to summarize the entire field of OERs, but in your classroom for you, what has been the good and what has been the bad?
Well, the good is that I get to make connections with other French teachers who are as excited about using these materials and teaching French in a new way as I am. I mentioned earlier when we were in groups and I was moderating, reporting back that it can be frustrating sometimes to sell this whole idea to colleagues who don't know what OERs are and have been doing things in a certain way for a certain number of years. So that's kind of a frustration that I've had. But I'm happy to report now that my home institution has fully adopted Français Interactif. And so now we all are going to be teaching from it. So
good. Yeah, that's a good example of you're creating your own little community of practice right in. I mean, we think of big communities of practice, but our colleagues are a little core. Yeah. Amy.
I think the major pro for our program has been having the instructors themselves have buy-in, because the graduate students are creating a lot of these materials. So we have 40 graduate student instructors at a time working with these materials, and these now it feels like theirs. And while we're using them as pedagogical development for them, the future professoriate, it's also helping them feel more connected to the teaching part of their job and trying to connect that to their research part of their studies.
That sounds like a double-edged sword, though. I feel like that could be a pro and a con, right? You have 40 people, graduate students, creating materials? Question mark?
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that in the development part tomorrow, yeah. But a con has definitely been foisting the technology on everyone, because it is all digital. You know, basically, I asked these people to just jump off a cliff with me. You know, like we're not gonna have a textbook. We're gonna do this. And I mean, any kind of radical change, you know, results in radical pushback. So it's been challenging. I think that we're primarily believers, at least on the instructor level, and then that trickles down to the students. When the instructors are reticent, that comes through very clearly, and you can see that in the student evaluations. If the instructor's not on board, then the students certainly will wonder what we're doing. The technology itself has been part of the con. Everyone, you know, a lot of people have been requesting print materials, and I think that's possible with some of the materials that are being produced, because there can be a PDF version. What we're doing, trying to be more specific for the web people, is actually sort of creating a hub or a portal to accessing authentic materials. And so when we Well, then we get the student evaluations, and they're like, why won't you just let us print this? And I was like, we really have a communication problem here because I cannot print the internet for you, or the video, or, like, it just let us know that we were not communicating clearly enough to our students what this was, that there was no secret print version that we were withholding, that was not what we were doing. And so that's been challenging in the classroom, looking across the screen. We don't have a mobile version of it yet. We use a lot of Flash, so we are not yet iPad compatible or iPhone compatible, which is a problem. So it presents, the technology has been a challenge for our specific context.
Mm-hmm.
And I will probably repeat a lot of what you guys just said. The big pro is for us has been creating community of users and a community of designers, and that has resulted in a lot more buy-in. And it has changed the way both instructors and students look at the course. It has given us the ability to do what really makes sense in our context, which is a lot more complicated when you're using materials that are commercially developed and that are, as Carl said this morning, generic by definition. They have to be generic. This gives you the ability to create the materials that make sense in your particular context.
Let me interrupt you for a second and ask again, since they're asking for specifics, what got you to do this? All right, you had a textbook. Why didn't you just use the textbook for everything? Why did you say, I'm going to use it half and half? And you have a very specific set of goals that you were trying to accomplish. What were they?
Well, the truth is that everyone who uses a textbook spends a very significant amount of time trying to modify the textbook so that it works for your particular needs, right? We 6 years ago, we decided to go hybrid with our first-year Spanish course, and the commercially available materials were not designed for a hybrid course that only meets face-to-face half the time. So we had to do something to adapt to a new context, a new situation. We needed materials that reflected what we were doing in our own situation, where we were only meeting twice a week, as opposed to 4 days a week in a traditional program. So we had to create a lot of materials that were not available, and we had to modify a lot of what we had in the commercially available textbook that we were using, and in addition to that, create a lot of material. So rather than going and trying to retrofit the textbook that was available, we decided to spend the same amount of time developing different activities and assessment instruments and so on and so forth. And
so you've done 50%, right? So you have 50% textbook, 50% all your materials. Have you thought about 100% like Amy?
I have.
Yes. So what's keeping you from doing that? Just not enough time?
I'm working on it.
Oh, okay.
It's time consuming. I don't know if we're talking about the pros
absolutely.
and the cons as well.
That's a big.
But that's one of the big challenges, that it is time consuming. Right. That if you want to do it right, you have to have a team that really believes in what you're doing. If you're working with graduate students, like some of us are, they come and go every 2 or 3 years. So you're training new people, and you're trying to make them buy into your idea every 2 or 3 years. That's challenging, and that's time consuming. And if you're working primarily with that type of population, then most of the responsibility falls on one person. And that one person is you. And, we mentioned briefly this morning the challenge that people face when you're in a Research One institution where, this type of work may not receive the recognition that it should.
Okay. So, Chris, same question for you, pros and cons.
Okay. I guess pros, and this is really from my experience, in other words, this potential for diversification of the materials we use, and Amy is probably the poster child for this one, but she's working on an intermediate course as well. The French course is pretty rigorously designed, but we still, we were able to go shoot video in France, and then we went and shot in Montreal too. And as anybody who teaches French if your students who are, weaned on Parisian French, they hear somebody from Montreal speak, they kind of go, oh my God, what is it? So I actually convinced the Quebec government that I needed to do this, and they needed to give me a little bit of money to do it, and they did. Whether it actually helps is another question. But anyway, but that's something that, and I'd love to go to Senegal or something next, but we'll see. And the other thing, of course, is that our courseware and our particular platform allows us to track students in ways that it's impossible to do with a textbook. So really get a sense of where they are individually.
What exactly that's one of OLI's strongest suits.
It's one of their strongest suits, but it's still evolving, frankly.
Right.
We technically collect data on what every student does at every moment, including how many times they click the play bar and so forth. In terms of actually exploiting that data, that's another story. It's kind of coming. But even being able to know what pages they visited, and then of course we have those weekly quizzes, which give us a snapshot of what they've done in the course. That's extremely useful to an instructor. So other positives kind of locally for us is links across the university. We're in a technical university, so it gives me links to computer science and the Language Technologies Institute and human computer interaction, and then of course to other colleagues, people in this room, and other people across the country. Now, cons for me about OER generally is that the majority are not sustainable. My bugaboo is sustainability, and that's for both content and technical reasons. And Flash is an obvious example, and we're subject to we've got a lot of Flash in our courses right now too. And who's going to pay for rebuilding all those things that are in Flash right now, which was blood, sweat, and tears to begin with. But that's kind of on the development side. We'll go back to that.
Yeah. So I want to, and by the way, I should mention, if you people in the audience have questions, I've got questions prepared, but you can just come on up here and ask them. So we'll just have a whole session where we're grilling them or making comments. I want to come back to this notion of hybrid, because my suspicion is that most people who are using OER are trying to hybridize their classrooms. And I know George has done that, just as Fernando was talking about the hybrid model at Utah, George is nodding. So I want to pass the microphone down to George. And can you tell me, again, let's get specific, in your teaching situation, what does it mean? Because I think you consider your situation a hybrid.
Yes.
Okay, so what does that mean for your students, and what do the students do?
First of all, before I answer that question, I should say that, and I noticed some people had expressed some concerns about this online, the idea of sacrificing 2 precious face-to-face hours a week with your students, instead of speaking French with my students for 5 hours a week, why would you give that up and speak with them for 3 hours a week? And I can only speak from my own personal context, in that I teach in a community college, first of all. It's an open admissions institution. I was daydreaming about having an army of graduate students just a minute ago, but I'm back now. And I think my students' needs are perhaps a little bit different. They are not the same kinds of learners that one might find in a 4-year institution, whether it be public or private. I have all different age levels, people with children, jobs, other responsibilities, and so giving up that face-to-face time in exchange for something really did come to mind to me, and I was weighing what to do with them. So in my case, I've already described what we do in the face-to-face time, that is to say, work through the activities that are in the various chapters of Français Interactif, especially the more communicative activities. During the time that they're away from me, it just so happens that I happen to wear another hat at my institution, and that's that I'm the language technology person at my institution. So I'm sitting in the language labs where they have to go and do their 2 hours of time. So they're being not just monitored, and their work is not just being tracked on computer, but there's some guy that they see for 3 hours a week as their instructor there to help them out as well. So that can't be possible for everybody, of course. When they come to the language labs, and during those 2 hours, they have to be in a physical computer lab on campus. Our institution spent a lot of money on some physical language labs, and paid some guy to work in that language lab, and bought a lot of really nice software, and not everyone was using it. So it's my job as the language technology cheerleader to use that language technology. And so what they're doing in the language labs for those 2 hours a week are things like using software. I've picked specific exercises that go with the grammar, the vocabulary, the culture of the given chapters that we're working our way through in Tell Me More, for example. Or if it's a grammar point, I use another piece of software called French Grammar Tutor. And I work a lot on pronunciation with them, or open-ended speaking. So if there's an open-ended speaking topic, a list of conversation questions, a reading passage, some cultural note in the margin of the book, I'll have them record that and send it to me. So they're working on compositions as well. So they're using writing aids that are only accessible in the language labs. Like we have this thing called Système D that lets them
Can I bring
references.
up a point
Yeah.
to follow up what you're saying? This comes from Amanda DeLola, who could join us here in person, but is here online. And Amanda is a graduate student here at UT, and she is a user of Français Interactif, and she writes in that it's changed my use of OER. I changed kind of my conception of what the teacher is. It's more of a tour guide. And as you're talking about the changing role of teachers, you have a double role. You're a teacher, but you're also the director of this Language Technology Center. Mm-hmm. So I was just thinking about Amanda's comment of tour guide. Tell me more. All these technologies that you were running through this list, mm-hmm. when you're teaching in the classroom, that's one part of your job. But then when you do in a hybrid course, when you say, "Oh yeah, go and do all that other stuff," what do you do? Are you teaching then?
No, no, I'm not one-to-one teaching them. If they have a question, they know where my office is. It's in the lab. They'll come and find me and ask me a question. But I'm...
Well, I guess going back to her metaphor of the tour guide, mm-hmm. You can't just expect them to give the stuff to do online. Do they not need some help to find things?
Every once in a while they do. They have an orientation at the beginning of the semester when I take them first and guide them through the specific tasks that they have to do in the language labs. And I give very explicit instructions as well.
Okay.
With lots of screenshots and arrows and smiley faces.
Okay, so we're still talking about hybrid. Would you consider, Amy, your course hybrid?
I think that the term hybrid is, at least to my mind, changing because what exactly makes the course hybrid? That part of it is taking place, the learning is taking place outside of class. I mean, does that make it hybrid, or is it that we're using technology to facilitate language learning? Does that make it hybrid? I mean, I think most, even commercial products, have an online workbook component, and if the students are doing online workbook, I don't know if that's true for K-12 materials, but at least for higher ed materials, that's the case. So what exactly is hybrid? I mean, we have the contact time in class, so there's not less contact time, but I would think on some level, yes. And then if you start thinking about hybrid in terms of what it means with the actual materials that you're using to teach the course, mm-hmm. that concept of remixing materials online is sort of the new hybridity that some scholars are discussing. Mm-hmm. So I think that hybrid, all of this has almost become taken for granted that you're going to have some technology in your teaching. And mm-hmm. so maybe it's a continuum now of, how much takes place in class and out of class. I think that what can take place out of class things that don't involve other human beings necessarily, can take place out of class, and that's appropriate. And
yeah, I guess a new term that seems to be coming in is flipping.
right.
So it's not just the notion of hybrid, because you're right, everybody's mixing these
That's right.
things online and offline, but it's what you used to do now has migrated someplace else. So you're flipping things around somehow.
That's right. So it's more engaged problem-solving time, or in the case of foreign language, it's interaction time,
Right.
and then other components of learning take place outside of class.
Okay. So yeah, same question, Fernando. The specifics of the Utah program. What do they do? What do your students do?
Well, ours is a hybrid program, and following up on what Amy just said, not because we are combining face-to-face with online time, but because I think we changed the way we look at the roles of instructor and students. And, in the old model, I think you're probably all familiar with the Atlas complex, and the Atlas as the teacher who's responsible for all the knowledge that is present in the classroom. That was the old model. The new model is we are the architects, right? We are the tour guides. We design the plan, the learning plan for our students. And if you believe that that's the right model, then your presence in the classroom is not always indispensable, right? Your students can get input in the target language from a variety of sources, and technology now allows that. And if you believe in that, then a better use of your time is to give your students opportunities to be exposed to those other sources of knowledge that are available out there. So what we do in our program is we reduce the face-to-face time by half. And when we are not there, when we're not in the face-to-face session or portion of the class, students are doing activities online. And it can be a variety of things, from watching videos to reading authentic text to interacting with other students in the target language. Basically, what they're doing when they're not in the classroom is they're preparing or doing preliminary stuff that will be necessary for them to do the communicative practice that they have to do in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an example of how we use the little OERs, if in a first-year classroom they're dealing with food, for example, we have a number of study abroad programs all over the world in Spanish. And in some of those programs, the students who participate in those programs have to maintain a weekly blog, and we give them blog assignments. So every week they have a topic that they have to blog about, right? So one week they have to blog about eating in the country where they're staying. So if they're in the Dominican Republic, they write about eating in the Dominican Republic. What do people eat? How do they eat? If they're in Spain, they do the same thing. So when the students are on campus taking the regular course, one of the things that they have to do during their online time is they have to go online and read those blogs that other peers posted when they were abroad, read them, make comments, come back to class, and be prepared to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fernando just mentioned that what his learners are doing outside of class is helping them prepare for what they're going to do during the face-to-face time. And that reminded me of one of the big differences of the way things were before as they are now in my own course. We had to pull the car over a lot during class time and work on the car, open up the hood and work on the car, talk about grammar, etc. And we may not be on the Autobahn all the time now, but we're moving at a nice steady pace all the time, and we don't have to pull the car over now.
In terms of what definitions of hybrid, in other words, to me, hybrid means reduced class time in favor of sort of displaced interaction. The interaction is displaced into an online environment. So, and at the very beginning of our design process, we were talking about one very flawed instructional context and replacing it with one which is a flawed instructional context. But they're about equal. And the first one, of course, is the classroom. And the second one is a hybrid instructional delivery. And the classroom, why is it flawed? Because you've got a whole room full of people, and what do they need? They need input, and they need production opportunities, and they mostly don't get them. They get input, okay. Production opportunities, we did some math, you know, when we were talking about, well, what do we need to actually replace? About 5 minutes a week of, you know, if you're in a class of 25 students, how much time does each student get to express him or herself in a creative way, other than sort of a drill response or something? Maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, you've got the dominant kids who might get up to 6 or 7 and maybe even 10. Some kids get 1 minute in a week. So what are you actually replacing? Not much. It doesn't work very well. It's what we do. It's what we've done for years, decades. It doesn't work very well. Our students learn slowly. We don't give them enough time. To replace that isn't that hard. So with our online environment, we say, okay, 80 minutes, it's all communicative. 20 minutes individual every week. Well, we've already hit the ball out of the park in terms of the individual students. After that, all the input sources, massive amounts of audio, video, diverse accents, interactive exercises, and so forth. You know, we did a 3-year comparative study when we started down this road, and basically it was no significant difference right across the board from classroom to the hybrid instructional
Well, you mean in terms of their proficiency level at the end, their performance?
Exactly. Yeah, and we had external evaluators for the whole thing. In other words, people who are doing speaking samples and writing samples and so forth, as well as the common final exams and so forth. So it was an exhaustively defined evaluative study over 3 years, designed by people, by psychologists. You know, we didn't touch it. So, and so really, it's for me. It's
okay, but I would say as an administrator, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. So, but that's you've cut face-to-face time with an instructor in half, and you still have the same performance. That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. However, part of the evaluation.
Because I can hire fewer teachers.
No, you can't. And believe me, because actually, when our first grant funding, when we got it, which was $400,000 from Mellon Foundation, they were at the time, Mellon was funding stuff throughout higher ed and asking everyone to sign on the dotted line that they were going to save instructor time. Everybody signed except me. I said, it ain't going to happen. It's going to be just as intensive. And we documented that through logs and so forth, but for students and instructors, same amount of time on task, you know, whether it's the hybrid design or the in-class. The instructors, yeah, they only have 80 minutes face-to-face. Try meeting, we do half and half, so I've got 10 students, 20 minutes each every week. Well, you're getting close already. Then you have to be available online. If you really only go online once a week or something to correct tests, that you're not a hybrid instructor. So in fact, in terms of time commitment by the instructor, it's no less. And if you go over those numbers, you go up into the 30s.
Okay, let me hear from Amy and Fernando, because I don't think they completely agree, or maybe they have a different experience.
No, but I just wanted to add that if you're concerned about convincing your administrators that this works, we also did studies looking at levels of proficiency of students who were taking the hybrid courses versus the traditional courses. There's no significant difference. But the only place where we did find a difference was in the level of retention. Students who are in the hybrid courses are much more likely to complete the language sequence than students who are in a traditional course. And that is good news for administrators, because that means that down the line at the higher levels you will have more students paying tuition.
And it's also good news for you, because language learning is longitudinal. It's developmental. It takes a long time. So I guess the assumption that filling around with a methodology is going to have these huge impact after a year, maybe not, probably not. Yeah.
No, I think that Fernando sort of spoke to my concern, because listening to Chris, it's, well, then why do it at all? I mean, if there's no significant differences between outcomes, there's no significant difference between instructor time. There's cost involved in development. It's nice that Carnegie gives you $400,000, but not everybody gets that. Why go hybrid? And I think Fernando has sort of answered that. You know, there's retention.
He's given, well, yeah, one answer is
retention is good.
But I would also say that you're still measuring the same thing. So maybe if you had different tests, you might find different. I mean, they're always learning. They may not be learning. It may not show you gains in linguistic proficiency, but I think there are other kinds of gains that might be measurable, right?
As long as those kinds of gains are meaningful to your administrators, if that's what we're talking about, you know, from an administrator perspective. I mean, yeah.
Right. Okay. Any questions from the audience? I'm doing all the work here. No one. I'm not getting any help from the online. Okay. Yes. We can talk about that tomorrow, how to integrate that in tomorrow, because we'll be talking about collaborating and sharing and putting on our developer's hat. So give me some time to think about how we could do that, because if they all do a show and tell, we're going to really run over time. But maybe we can give that idea to them and they can show kind of highlights quickly from their websites tomorrow.
Or if you Google me, I can send you my syllabus, course calendar, and examples of materials that I use with the OERs that I teach from.